Hello, we are Group 4. We will be talking about strategic issues and suggestions for Intel. So for an overview, Intel's background will be discussed by me, Cameron Dulce. Mia Douglas and I will be discussing strategic issues. Eric Burns will be talking about alternatives. Alex Shapiro will be evaluating the alternatives. Kyle Ito will be talking about the recommendations, and then I will conclude this presentation. So for Intel's background, I just wanted to start off with this quote by Andy Grove, the first president and CEO of Intel. Bad companies are destroyed by crises, good companies survive them, great companies are improved by them. Now, this quote in particular emphasizes what Intel stands for and is a reflection of their continuous growth and innovation as a company. So, located in Mountain View, California, Intel was founded in 1968 by American engineers Robert Noyce and Gordon Moore. Later, Andrew Grove, who would later become Intel's president and CEO, joined them. Intel is the world's largest semiconductor chip manufacturer by revenue, and by the early 21st century, Intel's microprocessors were found in more than 80% of PCs worldwide. Also in recent times, as in 2020, Intel's reported sales of 77.9 billion, continuously making it the world's largest semiconductor company. Now, Intel has remained competitive through a combination of clever marketing, well-supported research and development, superior manufacturing proficiency, their strong corporate culture, their legal proficiency, and its ongoing alliance with Microsoft. This alliance is often referred to as Wintel. And although Intel has continuously grown and changed over the past 50 years of dominance in the semiconductor industry, it currently faces multiple problems that can pose as larger roadblocks in the future. The first is chip shortages due to the coronavirus pandemic. A second is fierce competition from rivals such as TSMC, AMD, and Samsung Electronics that could put Intel's future dominance in the semiconductor industry in question. The third and last one is lost customers choosing alternative semiconductor chips manufacturers.
Hi, this is Mia, and I'm going to be going over the SWOT analysis for Intel. We're going to be starting with the strengths of the company in this first slide here. As previously noted, Intel is a widely known company, and it's known throughout the world best for their semiconductor and microprocessor chips. Some argue that Intel is an oligopoly, as it is a company that is within a market that is dominated only by a few large firms. The second strength of Intel lies in their budget for research and development. In 2020, Intel spent $13.56 billion on research and development to create high functioning products. This is 4 to 5 times more than their competitor AMD. Their large R&D budget allows them to be more flexible and create really great products that their customers want and need. Their in-house manufacturing is Intel's third strength. Intel has multiple factories within the US, which makes distribution to US companies and customers easier. Most companies send their work to be completed at factories in China, where there are low labor costs. Intel actually also assembles their products in China. However, their fabrication plants are Intel owned. They even assemble chips of other small companies here in their plants as well to make an extra buck. And this doesn't affect their competition at all. And the last strength we have here is brand loyalty. Intel, being one of the most reliable when it comes to high functioning chips, has a great following because they are a very trusted company. And we're going to be moving on to weaknesses in the next slide. So, although Intel is a really strong microprocessor company, they may be a bit too dependent on them. Their chips are their main source of revenue, and if anything were to happen where a new chip came out that was better and stronger than their own, Intel might be in a tough situation that they may not be able to come out of. Um, and so, with increasing demand, Intel has also been part of a worldwide chip shortage. They have not been able to keep up with the creation of their products due to struggles in finding materials and the lack of time to put them together. The last weakness that they have is that they are unable to enter the cell phone market. Many of their direct competitors have created microprocessors for cell phones or even the cell phone themselves. And Intel has not been able to get their chips into smartphones, which is a market that really has boomed within the past 15 years. Their failure to get into that market has actually cost them millions. And moving on to their opportunities in the next slide, there has been so many developments in the tech industry, and these improvements are in things such as AI. If Intel can produce chips that are capable enough to handle the extreme needs of an AI machine, they can be really successful. The automotive industry has also seen a great need for semiconductor chips and CPUs. And Intel should work closely with these car manufacturers so that they can get their chips in and gain more customers. The last opportunity they have lies in their popularity for their semiconductors. If they refocus and throw themselves into the research and further development of these chips, more companies will feel compelled to put them in their products. On to the last slide here with the threats. The threats that Intel is facing include a price war with their competitors. Intel's chips can be pretty pricey compared to their competitors. And so, if they want to remain competitive, they have to be careful about what they charge for their products. Companies such as AMD and new developers in China have also been developing chips that are almost of the same power as Intel, but a lot cheaper. And the last threat Intel has is the development of ARM chips, whose performance and power are arguably equal to that of Intel's. ARM chips are becoming more popular and more frequently used in products. And in our next slide, I'm going to be going over the first strategic issue that we have for Intel. One of the biggest issues Intel and many other chip suppliers have right now is that they are in this big chip shortage. In 2020, the demand for these chips sharply increased due to the pandemic. More people began doing school and work from home and needed high powered computers to get the job done. As more laptops and computers were being bought, Intel could not keep up with the demand. The CEO of Intel states that we may be in a chip shortage for about 2 more years. And this chip shortage not only affects their business, but the businesses of other manufacturers as well. The most impacted industry is actually the automotive industry. And as I mentioned before, the automotive industry is using more chips in their cars to power the displays and dashboards. Intel needs to keep business with these companies, but the chip shortage is causing manufacturers to make multiple orders of chips to a bunch of different suppliers, which is causing a lot of trouble in the supply chain. And so, with that being said, I'll hand it off to Cameron, who will discuss our second strategic issue.
So, competitors pose to be another one of Intel's strategic issues on the business and corporate level. And to give some context of why competitors are continuously becoming one of Intel's biggest obstacles, besides the chip shortages, is that Intel chips just aren't innovating and changing their chips to suit all of their buyers' preferences. Intel is quickly losing its competitive edge. And for instance, a while ago in 2020, Apple announced that it would develop its own semiconductor solutions to fit its new laptops and desktops. Intel just isn't meeting the specific needs of its customers, and the reason for this could be that Intel chips are strictly made for performance, but their competitors like AMD, ARM, Samsung, and TSMC are focused on efficiency. For example, ARM's semiconductor chips are extremely more customizable than Intel's. Intel sells their chips directly to businesses, while ARM licensed its CPU architecture to partners and provides custom solutions to buyers. This is extremely important because this sheds some insight that Intel's customers want to have an edge on their competitors by the efficiency of their chips to suit specific needs. It is possible that in the future that these type of buyer preferences will become more established.
Thank you. Today I will be discussing some alternatives for Intel. The team has come up with 3 different alternatives that Intel could begin to implement. First is to focus more on the semiconductor plants that are based in the US. mainly to increase the number of chips that are being produced. Second is to begin to focus on the automobile industry, and more specifically, the electric vehicle industry, so that they can begin to produce chips for new EVs that are hitting the road. And lastly, Intel could create a whole new line of products such as computers, phones, and laptops. Now, the chip shortage has put a strain on all chip producing companies, and Intel can take advantage by creating more semiconductor manufacturing plants within the US. They have the opportunity to produce within the US to compete with a major player in the industry, which is Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing. Doing so will also allow Intel to manufacture chips for their competitors, since they are all struggling to produce enough. Intel also has a major opportunity to get into the electric vehicle industry by providing chips for EV producers. The EV market is expected to register a compound annual growth rate of 40.7% from 2020 to 2027. And with that prediction, Intel could start establishing relationships with both established companies looking to pivot into the EV market and startups such as Lucid and Rivian to begin producing chips for their vehicles. Now, Intel would have to alter the process of how their chips are currently being produced in order to begin to manufacture for these types of vehicles. And lastly, Intel currently provides chips to companies such as Lenovo, HP, and Dell. And Intel could decide to expand into this market that they are currently supplying to by creating their own product lines, such as computers, laptops, and cell phones. Doing so would involve a major expansion to begin to produce all of the parts needed for these types of devices. But doing so would give Intel a competitive edge since they are producing their own chips that they'll put into these products. And now I'll pass it off to Alex, who will dive deeper into these alternatives.
Thanks, Eric. So I will be going over the evaluation of our alternatives and determining which is the best fit for Intel. Semiconductor manufacturing is currently being taken over by two companies. They are led by Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Co. and Korea's Samsung Electronics. These two companies are en route to have over double the manufacturing power than Intel in the next 5 years. This will help them gain market demand and potentially steal customers from Intel. If Intel wants to stay on top, they need to focus their attention to the manufacturing side of their processors. With the inclusion of new factories, they will be able to do just that. Although it might be the more expensive option of the three, increasing semiconductor manufacturing will help Intel in the long run. The process of opening new factories will take time, and which will help TSMC and Samsung continue to outproduce chips until these new factories are open. So in the short term, Intel will be hit harder because of this. Additional disadvantages of opening more factories in the US include the price of labor in the US versus Taiwan. In fact, one US engineer's salary is equivalent to six Taiwanese engineers' salaries. As stated earlier, the automotive sector has been hit the hardest by the chip shortage. In fact, many car companies have had to stop vehicle production altogether because of the lack of microprocessors. You can see here, car companies like Ford and GM are forced to shut down the production. Additionally, improvements are constantly being made in the automotive sector, making it an attractive market for Intel. Focusing manufacturing to the automotive sector will provide short and long-term advantages. And additionally, new partnerships can be made with different auto manufacturers, such as Tesla, other AI focused companies, and the other EV companies. Old factories can also be utilized to make these chips, which will help reduce the costs. Lastly, I want to talk about new products. Since Apple is no longer using Intel chips, Intel will have to find ways to make up for their loss in sales. And as stated earlier, we're talking about consumer electronics such as laptops, phones, and computers. A new product will do just that. However, it will require a large amount of time and research and development. It could potentially ruin customer relationships with companies like HP and Dell. In conclusion, the best strategy for Intel in the long run would be to build new factories in the US, as it would allow them to produce more chips, opening up more opportunities for new customers. If they want a short-term solution, focusing their chip manufacturing to the automotive sector would help drive revenue in the next 6 months. Additionally, this option would keep costs down compared to opening more factories in the US. So that does it for alternative analysis. Now Kyle will take care of our recommendations.
All right, so I'm going to be talking about the pros and cons of each of the alternatives and then give a final recommendation for Intel. For semiconductor focus, it would help Intel to take the lead in CPU manufacturing by building at least 2 more manufacturing plants in Arizona, where they already have a current facility there, and Michigan, where there's like a huge need for chips, like in the automotive industry. And Intel can capitalize on the shortage of chips, since many companies rely on TSMC, and Intel can manage itself despite the shortage, since they're capable of designing and manufacturing their own chips. And Intel could act as a manufacturer for these other companies, since TMC is struggling to keep up with demand. But this can't be addressed in the short term, because adding to existing production lines will take months, while building new manufacturing plants would take years. And on top of that, it would cost Intel billions of dollars to do this in order to increase production. For new product line, there's a high demand for electronic devices since the pandemic is causing people to stay home. So demand for in-home entertainment is going up. And introducing new Intel-only products would broaden its product line. But it wouldn't be a bad idea for the company, but this wouldn't be a viable option for Intel for many reasons. First, it would cost a lot of money, such as putting more money into research and development. And since Intel is only familiar with making processors. And it would be straying away from Intel's strengths, which would put them at a competitive disadvantage. And it may hurt relationships with other companies that use Intel CPUs, such as Microsoft, Dell, or HP. And there's already other products to overcome in the market, like for example, Apple's iPhone. So it'll be kind of too late for them to compete in this market. For automotive focus, there's a high demand for CPUs in the automotive industry, since automakers were the ones most affected by the chip shortage. They need the chips for key features such as navigation systems and digital displays inside of the car, which are like seen as standard features in today's car models. And there's an immediate need for automakers since they've had to completely shut down factories, lay off workers, and cut down on vehicle production as a result of the shortage. And Intel can negotiate with Tesla, since Tesla has expressed an interest in US manufacturing for its electric car battery. And since new car models want a newer, more advanced chip for features such as self-driving, company spending will actually go up in research and development in order to learn how to manufacture a chip that can support autonomous driving. And some companies are already ahead in this market segment, such as NVIDIA with its GPUs and Tesla with its AI chip. So after weighing the pros and cons of each alternative, we decided to recommend for Intel to go with the semiconductor focus, because building more manufacturing plants will directly confront the chip shortage by increasing production to keep up with demand. And Intel has plenty of capital to do this, and it shows that they're willing to compete with TSMC. Many chip makers will become less and less dependent on TSMC, which will make the overall supply chain for semiconductors healthier, since TSM won't be in complete control of the semiconductor manufacturing industry. Intel will ultimately become a major manufacturer of semiconductors, because many companies will be willing to deal with US-based manufacturing as opposed to foreign manufacturing to avoid tariffs and other restrictions. So that's it for recommendations.
So for the conclusion, Intel is still the largest semiconductor business by revenue, and we believe that Intel has the opportunity to successfully stay ahead of competition if they build more semiconductor manufacturing facilities in the US. This would help with the current chip shortage, as well as strategically differentiate from other semiconductor companies whose chips are still being made outside of the US. Here's our sources. Thank you.